Jason's Birds by Coven YT 2950 and Legolin 3791. Chapter 19. The night before. Again. Damien. He fell. The air was taken from his lungs, the fear gas still overwhelming his mind. Strangely, Damien's last thought was about Drake. His unwanted brother, the one that tried to take everything from him. The one who thought he could stop Damien from having what was rightfully his. The boy he tried to kill. Must he have felt the same, falling in the air towards the ground, knowing he wouldn't survive? Did he embrace it? The fear. The despair Damien was feeling at the moment, with his mind too dizzy for his body to move and do something to stop his fall. Would he die there like Drake should have, scared, desperate, alone? He remembered Cassandra's words. You don't have to like him. I don't like you a lot sometimes, baby bird. But Tim is your brother, like Dick is. He isn't an obstacle. He isn't something to destroy. Family is love, Damien, not pain. It didn't seem like that at the moment. A dark figure suddenly appeared in Damien's sight and embraced him in the air, turning their bodies before they hit the side stairs and then the ground. He didn't suffer any of the impact, immediately recognizing the suit against his skin. His father had come to his rescue. Shame took over Damien. He wasn't strong enough to stop Todd from kicking him off the roof, or save himself. He wasn't better than Drake at that moment. And it didn't matter what Cassandra said. That wasn't acceptable. Damien was about to get up and check on his father when the sensation of his great arms holding him tighter stopped him. He gasped and looked up to his father's face, about to say something, but deciding not to, with the expression on his face. His features were contorted in cold anger, contempt, and disgust, reminding him of the way his grandfather looked at him when he wasn't enough. His father never looked at him like that. The closest happened when he found out what he did to Drake, but there was more disappointment than any of that back then. Father, Damien started, but was interrupted by his father. What is it, Damien? You're going to ask sorry. Again. His father's voice was almost mocking, which wasn't normal. No, I know. I failed. But I will do better next time, Damien said humbly, but confidently, knowing his usual arrogance wasn't the right path to take. You had your chance to prove you can do better. And what did you do? You tried to kill your brother. His father snarled, his arms constricting him to the point he was breathless. Damien didn't understand what was happening, but his father was never so harsh with him. It was something so distant from what he had experienced with his mother and grandfather that, although he would never admit it, he was glad for it. There were the recriminations he received when he was too rude, or did something his father and Richard considered wrong, as last night. However, this was different. He was never suffocated by any of them, never physically hurt as much as he expected in the beginning. Father, I can't breathe. Damien choked out, squirming and trying to create some space between him and his father's arms. It didn't work.
Why should I care, Damien? I gave you countless chances to prove you deserve my blood running through your veins. You failed.
His father snarled. Damien breathed quickly and stopped fighting, trying to push air to his lungs as he slowly laid his cheek on his father's suit. His vision blurred as he stared at the dirt on the wall of the alley. His father's words burned. They were worse than any punishment his grandfather ever gave him. He squeezed his eyes shut, admonishing himself for his unshed tears. Just because it hurt to hear that, it didn't mean he was allowed to present such a weakness of emotions. Damien was the bloodchild of Bruce Wayne and Talia al Ghul. He knew what he owed to his birth. At the moment, however, maintaining a stoic facade was much easier said than done. He was running out of air, being suffocated by his own father, for reasonable reasons. He was the child that his father didn't choose, the one he wasn't actually able to raise and was forced to take, and he didn't prove his worth. However, he hadn't gotten so far to give up now. Damien had to convince his father that he could still show him he was his rightful son, even if he had to fight him for it. Breathing deeply with difficulty, Damien looked up and apologized. I'm sorry, father, before he punched his father's throat with all the strength he had. His father choked, and his arms finally released him, causing Damien to gasp, and allowing him to get up. He panted and took a few steps backwards, staggering involuntarily. He watched his father put his hands on his throat. His instinct was to help him, but he didn't know what would happen if he approached. "You're right in being mad at me, father. But I won't repeat my mistakes. It won't happen next time." Damien apologized again, which was more than he did in the last years, keeping his tone steady to not show how confusing his emotions were.
"There will be no next time."
His father growled as he rose, his great, dark figure intimidating Damien in a way it never did, and making him raise his guard. He fought his father before. He defied him, with no hesitation. He proved that he was his true son. Then why, for the first time, was he scared of him, of what he could do? "But I can be better," Damien whispered, hating how not confident he was about it.
"No, you can't. When Tim is back, I'll give Robin back to him. You'll be lucky if I still let you be Damian Wayne."
His father spat, and took off his mask, sticking an imaginary dagger into his heart. No, not Robin. It belonged to him. It was his right. "Drake isn't better than me. He is weak. I'm your true son, not him," Damien said through clenched teeth. "Family is love, not pain." Then why did Drake keep trying to take everything from me? Why was it hurting so bad?
"Do you think just because you have my blood, it means something to me? I had pity on you. That's why I allowed you to become part of this family."
His father snapped, contempt dripping from his voice.
"But it was a mistake. You're no hero, Damien. You're nothing else but an assassin."
A knot formed in his throat. It wasn't true. He had made progress. He didn't kill anymore. He was a hero. He was Robin. However, what kind of Robin tried to kill his own brother? Todd, at least, had an excuse for it. But what about him? No, he couldn't let the doubts take over him. "Father, Damien's voice cracked against his will as tears filled his eyes and he clenched his fists. He didn't understand why he was acting so weak. Why couldn't he just control his emotions like always? He was Damian Wayne, not a stupid, scared kid with no control of himself. He deserved everything he had.
"No more discussion, Damien. You will accept it easily, or I'm going to force you to. You choose."
His father snarled, with a stern expression on his face. Damien put his head between his hands, walking backwards as his father approached. The disgusting smell of the alley grew stronger, the darkness of the shadows expanding. He couldn't think straight. Why was father doing this to him? It was like his mind was cloudy, his thoughts torn apart. However, even on edge, he wouldn't just give up on Robin, on his family. "No, you can't decide that. Richard was the one to give me Robin," Damien shouted angrily, opening his mouth to continue, when the shock of reality reached him. Richard. He was in the building Todd took down. He could be dead by now. Damien froze with the realization and let down his guard for a moment. It was too late when the figure of his father moved and was suddenly in front of him. He didn't have time to react to the sensation of a hand holding his throat and a needle piercing his neck.
"Dick is dead, Damien, because of you,"
his father whispered cruelly to his face as Damien's limbs loosened, falling on his father's arms, who held him close to his body as he kneeled. The grip was suffocating, instead of comforting, as they should be. As they were. Damien felt tears rolling down his face. He was crying. For Richard? For himself? He had no idea, because he never cried.
"And when we come back home, I will do what I should have done before,"
his father informed, with a parody of a soft caress on his cheek.
"I will send you to spend some time with your grandfather."
It was impossible for Damien's blood to run cold, not when his body was forced to relax against his will. However, it was exactly how he felt as his brain slowed down and his consciousness started to slowly fade away. Family is love, not pain. Cassandra had to know he tried to believe in that. He truly wished that when Richard and his father were kind to him, when they cared for him, there wasn't a deadline for it, and they were just naive idiots who loved too much. That Alfred didn't see him as a burden to deal with, and he wasn't actually too gentle and patient with someone like him. that even with all their fights and bickering, Todd didn't really hate him. Damien hoped Thomas, Stephanie, and Cassandra hadn't left because he was too insufferable and wasn't worth their time, and that John hadn't made a mistake when he said he was good. Mainly, however, Damien wanted to believe all the times Drake offered a hand of friendship when they first met. It had been real. That the hand he passed but truly wished to take wasn't just an attempt for Drake to have what belonged to him. That perhaps, just perhaps, the true source of his resentment and apathy, the suspicion that Drake had won the contest before Damien even arrived on the scene, wasn't true. Family is love, not pain. He wasn't able to see it, however, looking at his father's dark eyes, full of cruelty and rage, as he removed the needle from his neck. Damien could believe they were both. Family was love and pain. It was just a pity he hadn't realized he felt more than just one of them before it was too late. Bruce. He cut through the fog, taking over his mind as he watched Jason kick Damien off the roof, forcing his body to move and jump into the darkness behind him. It was like time was in slow motion. He would never forget the fear he saw shining in Damien's eyes, the way his son's arms reached in the air to hold something. His son wouldn't survive it. Bruce would have liked to say that he planned exactly how he would save Damien, but all he could feel in that moment was panic and despair. No logic, just like when Jason died. He opened his arms and protectively held Damien's body against his, turning them in air, just in time for his back to hit the side stairs of the building. That would have broken Damien before he hit the ground. For a moment, his vision went white, overwhelmed by pain. But then he gasped, breathless, grunting and panting. It hurt. He made a face at the pain. But Bruce had been through worse. He could deal with a fall like that. Ignoring it, he focused on stabilizing his breath and checking on his possible injuries. Bruce certainly should have come with his armor, but his suit had protected him at its best, so nothing was broken, which didn't mean he wouldn't have really bad bruises that would hurt for a long time. It didn't matter now. He had to check on Damien. Bruce looked down with difficulty to see a scene he didn't think he would ever see. Damien was crying against his chest, his body trembling like a leaf. It was then Bruce remembered. The fear toxin.
I would love to watch what the fear toxin Scarecrow used on Timmers would do to the both of you.
The effects would soon start to reach him. He had to get the antidote. Bruce tried to move his arms, but when he did so, Damien faced him with the startled eyes of a deer on the road at night. Bruce was about to say something when his son started squirming and hitting his suit, causing him to groan in pain at the pressure on the bruises on his back. It hurt to see his son so scared and out of control, but he would have to be quick. Bruce held Damien tightly against his abdomen, with his left arm, ignoring his struggles. He grunted as he moved his right hand to his belt and grabbed a gas antidote. He released it in the air, breathing deeply and watching his son inhale the antidote through the gas. His movements started to slow, until he rested his cheek on his chest, breathing slowly. They stayed like that for a few moments, but before Bruce could even think about moving them, Damien looked up at him and snarled, "Get away from me!" Then punched Bruce's throat with enough strength to take the air from his lungs for a moment.
"Damien!"
he gasped, involuntarily releasing his son, who didn't even look at him, nor hesitate to start running towards the other side of the alley. Bruce couldn't let him. Jason was still around here, and he had already taken Tim from him. And Dick. He had to have survived. He had to. But Damien was vulnerable right now. He needed protection. Bruce struggled to rise and breathe straight, not allowing the pain in his back to stop him from moving and running behind his son. Damien was faster than him, but for some reason, he was stumbling and tripping over his own feet, desperately getting up. Something was wrong, but he had to get his son to find out what it was. He approached Damien, who faced him in panic. "No, no, no. Don't get close," Damien whispered, scared and angry. No, terrified and full of hatred. It was like a stab cutting through his heart. His son wasn't himself. He was acting as if he was still under the effects of a fear toxin. But it was impossible. This was an antidote he made from what he had collected from the toxin Jason used on Scarecrow, which led to his death. It was the same one he supposed was used on Tim, because it was the strongest kind he had ever seen. It should have neutralized it. But if it didn't, then he was also under the effects of it. Was what he was seeing even real? Was Damien really saying those things? Was he looking at him like that? Bruce couldn't know. He didn't know because he couldn't trust any of his senses or his brain. All he could do was keep him and Damien safe, together, then call Oracle to ask about Dick and wait until Alfred came for them. But for that, he would have to stop his son from suffering more with the hallucinations, and he had no choice but to sedate him. It was better for him. And maybe, because deep down, Bruce didn't want to know what Damien was actually seeing.
"It's okay, son,"
Bruce said softly, taking a risk and moving his mask to show his face.
"It's me, your father."
"I know. That's why I told you to stay away from me," Damien snarled between clenched teeth. It took every single year of experience Bruce had with emotional pain to not show how it hurt. That wasn't what his son meant. It was just the hallucinations. But weren't they his worst fear? Hallucinations or not? Could Jason have said the truth about what Tim's worst fear was? Did Bruce really manage to not only scare one of his children, but two? Enough for him to become their worst fears? Ignoring the knot in his throat, Bruce slowly reached for the sedative in his belt as he spoke calmly.
"I don't know what you're seeing, Damien, but I would never hurt you. I'm your father."
"You're lying. You hurt Richard. You hurt Todd. And you hurt Drake.
All you do is hurt your children,"
Damien snapped, getting up with a look full of rage.
"Damie,"
Bruce whispered, his voice involuntarily cracking and giving his son room to continue. "No, that's why Stephanie and Cassandra left. That's why Thomas doesn't live with us. Can't you see it, Father?"
"We hate you,"
Damien shouted, with his fists clenched, tears filling his eyes. "And now, Richard is dead because of you."
That wasn't true.
Nothing of that was true. Bruce had to remind himself as he held the sedative tightly and approached Damien.
"He isn't, son. This isn't real. You aren't."
Bruce started, but was interrupted by Damien.
"What?"
"Tired of you? Like everyone else.
"Like Todd."
You don't understand it, do you?" Damien spat with contempt, and took a step forward, lowering his guard enough for Bruce to move quickly and hold the side of his head, injecting the sedative into his neck. His son held his wrists and struggled a bit before his limbs loosened, and Bruce held him, as he knelt, watching Damien's eyes get unfocused. "Father," his son whispered, his head resting on his arm.
"I'm here, Damien,"
Bruce said, in a comforting tone, caressing his son's cheek. "Todd was right. You'll die alone, rotting in the mansion, and there will be no one to cry for you." Damien smiled bitterly, before his eyes rolled up. It was impossible for Damien to know what Jason had told him that night in the manor. At maximum, Dick had heard it. He knew that it was just the fear toxin messing with his mind. None of this was real. Bruce clenched his teeth and threw the sedative away, holding his son's body against his chest and dragging him until his back rested on the dirt wall of the alley. He groaned when the bruise on his back was pressed, but was quickly able to ignore it and open the communication line. He had to have news from Dick and ask Alfred to come pick them up. Bruce wasn't in the right mind to drive, not when he wasn't sure if the effects were fully over, or where Jason was.
"Oracle, do you have news from Nightwing?"
Bruce questioned in his Batman's voice, not hiding his concern. Dick had to be alive. He had to have found a way out. He was Nightwing, his son. He would have figured a way to survive, because Bruce didn't know what he would do if he hadn't. "Nightwing is alive, Batman," Oracle informed, but her voice was cold and calculating. That was unusual. It wasn't normal, but the only thing Bruce paid attention to was what she had said. He immediately sighed in relief. His older son was alive. He hadn't lost him. He was about to ask to talk to him when Oracle spoke first. "Not that that was because of you."
"What?" "Oracle," Batman said, being interrupted once more that night.
"No, Batman. I'm done. Do you dare ask about Dick? He almost died because of you," Oracle shouted angrily, in a way he never heard her doing. Bruce understood. She was mad at him. Of course she was. Dick and her were close, and he had a building thrown at him. But now wasn't the time for it. I get you're worried and angry, Oracle, but I have to talk to Nightwing, Bruce argued, trying to keep his authoritarian tone out of his voice. It would serve for nothing. You won't talk to Dick, because he doesn't want to speak to you, Oracle stated harshly. What did she mean? It was okay if Dick was mad too, but he would want to know about Damien. Barbara, you're not making sense. If Dick is hurt, I have to know. He's my son, Bruce said worriedly. Do I have to spell it for you? Bruce. Dick doesn't want to see you again. Ever. Neither do I, nor Alfred. Her words shouldn't have hit Bruce as hard as they did. The logical side of his mind knew that it was possible the toxin was so powerful that it distorted even what he heard through the communication line. It was the clear and only explanation. But the logical side of Bruce's mind was far gone, even without him realizing it. All he could hear was the fact that his family hated him. They didn't want him anymore. He knew that day would come. Bruce wasn't a genius for nothing. He was well aware that one day his family would get to their limits. He wasn't made to love and be loved, to be anything more than the Dark Knight of Gotham. That was why he lost Selina. He pushed everyone he cared about away because he didn't know how to keep them close, and now they were tired of him. Was Alfred really feeling the same? Did he make the man that was like his father hate him? I understand, but me and Damien need assistance in my location. Can you tell Dick and Alfred to come for him? Bruce asked, almost pleading. He could wait until the effects of the toxin were gone, and then go to the mansion. But he didn't know if he could protect Damien if they were attacked, not when he couldn't rely on himself. I will, but only under one condition, Oracle said coldly. Alfred will go there and take Damien, but you will leave before and never come back to the mansion. I don't care where you decide to live, as long as you promise to stay away from us. He couldn't. Bruce didn't think he could keep that promise. Not when Jason was out of control, when many villains and criminals had already died. When he didn't think he could just not be close to his family in that situation, trying to protect and keep them safe, as he had failed to do. But if he didn't do it, if he lied to Oracle, what would it matter? Bruce wouldn't have his family back. Not now, at least. Maybe for the first time, he could be what his family needed, what they wanted, even if it shattered his heart into a million pieces. Okay, I'll do it, Bruce choked out. Good. Alfred will be there in 5 minutes. I suggest you leave before it, or I don't think he will hesitate to force you, Oracle ordered, immediately turning off the communication line. She already knew he would take it. Of course she did. She could not be his daughter, but Barbara had always been too good to have accepted to be his partner. He was proud of her, in a way. Bruce held Damien's body closer, passing his fingers through his hair and resting his forehead on his. He closed his eyes for a few minutes. It was all his fault. He failed not only Gotham, but his family. And both paid the price. He didn't deserve any of them. Breathing deeply, he opened his eyes and looked at his son's face. He knew time was running out, that he only had 2 minutes left, but it wasn't as easy as he thought, as Batman should be able to act. He heard the noise of Alfred's car arriving in front of the alley, and still, Bruce couldn't move. He couldn't force himself to do what he had agreed to. And because of it, he would have to face Alfred, to see what made him despise him shining in his eyes. Luckily or not, before Bruce knew it, he felt what certainly was a tranq dart on his neck. His mask. He forgot to put it back on. He lost control of his body, his vision blurring, as he was forced to watch a tall figure that was totally Alfred take his son from his arms. Alfred would leave him there, for any villain, criminal, or civilian to find. His Alfred wouldn't do that. Would he? Darkness swallowed Bruce's mind before his question could be answered. Chapter 20. Jason. The first thing he realized when he opened his eyes was that he wasn't in control of his body. He was standing right next to Timmy's bed, watching him sleep deeply. Which wasn't an uncommon scene anymore. But what he was seeing had already happened. Those were just memories. Hood's memories. Motherfucker. Jason was right. Of course he was. The fucking pit was messing with him again. As if one time wasn't enough. The universe really loved to fuck his life up. He couldn't do anything as Hood crouched, looking straight at Timbo's relaxed expression in a way that Jason didn't like. with admiration, care, possessiveness. It was like how he looked at his little brother. But it wasn't weird when it came from him. Differently when an elderly being that shouldn't even exist did it. It gave him shudders and made his blood boil. Mainly when he started hearing Hood's thoughts as he stretched out his hand and stroked Timur's hair. He's so fragile. It would be so easy to hurt him. No fucking way! Jason knew this was just a memory and Hood hadn't really done anything to Timbits, but it still pissed him off. But isn't that what you thought when you were fixing him? A part of him questioned. Okay, yeah, he could have done it. But it was different. He was Timmy's brother, and that thought quickly changed. He's not like the other stupid humans, though. He is my bird. One of my birds. No, he wasn't. He was Jason's bird. Part of his family. Who did Hood think he was to think like that? Jason is too slow. He's taking too long. Did he really think he could make his plan happen by himself? Yes, he could. And he would. He didn't need the pit to possess his body and tell him what to do. He just had to find a way to get that thing off him as soon as he was back in control. Or die trying. Which wasn't much more likely to happen, but wouldn't make him back off. Because there was no way he would let it take everything he had again. No one could anymore. Not Joker, not Bee, and certainly not millions of thousands of tortured souls consumed by the pit. That was his fucking body. His brother, his family, his city. He is lucky I'm here. I will make shit happen. And when I'm done, the little Robin will have everything he wants. No matter what I have to do to get it. Jason froze for a moment. Okay, that was too similar to his own thoughts. Almost as if they were mirrored in a dark way. What the hell was happening? Was it possible that Hood wanted the same thing as him? But why? How? Jason watched Hood smile and ruffle Timur's hair, before getting up, and a blur of images of him gently drugging Timbo as hours passed appeared in his mind. Timbits, as the fucking genius he was, quickly realized that Jason wasn't himself. Take it, you son of a bitch! That was his little bird. Jason didn't have any idea how his little bird knew. But he knew. And he felt his heart warm. With that knowledge at the same time, he got worried about how Hood would react to that. But he didn't get violent or mad. He just praised Timbits for it, calmly persuading him to swallow the pills, and sweetly talking to him until he fell asleep. It was honestly weird and uncomfortable to watch it. Jason could feel the way his hands caringly touched and moved his little brother. He could hear his own voice saying those soft words. But it wasn't him. He didn't have control over anything. And still, Hood was treating Timmy as if he was truly his little brother. As if he was one of the most precious things in the world. That didn't make any fucking sense. Hood was the essence of the pit, like a sinister and insane force of death and destruction, or something like that, from what Talia had told him. He really didn't remember all the words she used, but he remembered she mentioned he was only supposed to have one goal in his existence. Revenge. But not the normal kind of shit Jason had tried. No. Hood would be moved by a consuming and destructive will of revenge that would make him burn everything just to achieve it. He was unstoppable, tireless, ruthless. So why the hell was he playing dollhouse with his little brother? Was it possible that Jason was so unlucky that the entity possessing his body was having a fucking identity crisis? If someone would have that bad luck, surely it was him. Jason was driven out of his thoughts when Hood started to make calls to disgusting people that Jason knew well, invoking a reunion between them. And it suddenly was like he was watching a completely different person. Why the fuck would I want it? You should be asking why the fuck you're still alive, you piece of shit. The only reason I didn't walk into your club and rip your skin off is because you're not that annoying yet. Hood snarled on the phone, spit dripping from his voice. Which can quickly change. He walked around the bedroom. But not out of nervousness, it seemed. No, Jason could feel it. The struggle to control his will of leaving the bunker and beating the shit out of the first sucker he found. Jason had felt it many times, but never so strongly. You should accept it because you're still useful to me. Different from the last 3 villains that stood in my way. Now, if you want to test my patience, I'm sure I can find someone to take your shitty place. Hood sneered, his voice so cold that Jason found it was hard to imagine that it was also his voice. Not that he couldn't act like that, He knew he could. He was considered a villain, and was a drug lord for enough time to know that he was actually pretty fucking great at being scary. He liked it. The Green liked it even more back then. The violent thoughts running inside Hood's mind, though, were just on another level. They didn't affect Jason, strangely, being more like whispers, hard to even understand. But they were there. Hood finally seemed like it was made out of thousands of murdered souls inside him, seeking blood. Of course I'm fucking back. Well, if you don't appear, you better believe I'll find time to shoot your face so many times that even Batman would have a hard time looking at it. And you don't want to be an example of what I'm capable of, do you? Hood threatened, holding the phone tightly and clenching his teeth. For a moment, it seemed like he was about to lose his mind, and Jason immediately worried about Tim. It had been a long, long time since he felt impotent, but that was how he was feeling at that moment. Even if he knew Timmers was okay, that he wasn't hurt when he woke up, it was impossible for him to not be concerned. Fuck, he cared about his little bird, and he was tired of fighting that thought. But then Hood glanced at Timbo, and it was like time froze. Jason was ready for everything, but not for him to just smile and turn, continuing to threaten the guy on the phone, as if nothing had happened. What the hell? When Jason shot himself in the head, he expected to have to deal with a manic asshole that wanted to use his body to kill and mess around. That wasn't what happened. Why was Hood acting so out from what he should be? Was he trying to copy Jason's personality? Acquire his behavior? Maybe to take his place? No, it couldn't be. He referred to himself as Hood. He confessed to Timmy that he wasn't Jason, and that wasn't a good way to substitute him. If that was the case, could it be that he was there to take everything from Jason, just like the Pit had in the past? If yes, then why? The scenario suddenly changed completely, causing Jason's head to spin with the speed of the images swirling around his mind. The building, Bea, Dickie, and Damien, the explosion, the fear toxin he had forced Scarecrow to make, the fall of the demon spawn with Bruce right behind him. It was a mess. Everything was happening too fast. He didn't have time to process it at all. But Jason could still identify from where Hood took the idea for each step of what he did. It was part of Jason's plan. Of course, it shouldn't have happened so early, but he intended to make it happen when it was time to capture Dickie. Hood had said he was too slow. So, what? He just decided to rob his plan and make it happen faster? He had also said collecting birds was enough to feed whatever hunger was inside him, to substitute what revenge was for him. Did his intentions become the same as Jason's because he was possessing him? It was the only thing that made sense. If Hood was just to take over his body and burn the world, Jason knew it was hard for him to stop him. As much as he hated that fact, and would fight to make sure it never happened, there was a reason why he was seeing those memories now, when before he wasn't even aware of them. Hood was allowing him to, so it was his chance to understand what kind of shit he was messing with. Hood headed to the fallen buildings, lifting and throwing the heavy pieces of concrete as if they weighed nothing. Well, at least something good had come from it. Jason never thought he would become a superhuman, but here he was. His existence just found another way to piss off Bea. Hood arrived at where the great safe box was, turned upside down. He opened it and immediately saw Goldie trying to stand up and untie the sucker that had fallen to the side. Typical. The guy didn't deserve to be close to Dickie. Even more, being helped by him. But he was still doing it. I have to fix it. Jason agreed with Hood for a second time, and he didn't know if that was good or bad. Hood shot the guy in the head, watching his blood spill on Goldie's face as he closed his eyes. Jason didn't expect Hood to do it, but he couldn't help but feel a hint of satisfaction with the act. What's up, Big Bird? Hood greeted him with a smirk. You shot him, Dickie gasped, breathless. His eyes widened and his features contorted in shock. The dirty blood of the guy mixing with Goldie's bloody nose. As if he didn't believe what had happened. Well, he better. I fucking did. Any problem? Hood questioned sarcastically, and stepped inside the safe box. You killed him! You killed them, Jason! What the— Dickie started angrily, but was interrupted by Hood aiming one of his guns at him, and shooting him. Okay, now that wasn't in his fucking plan. Jason was about to panic again, when suddenly the memory got blurred, and when it was back to normal, he felt like he was acting as Hood, as if they were one and he was in control of his body, even when Hood was actually doing everything. Goldie panted as he fell backwards. putting his hand over the place the bullet was stuck on his suit. "And now I shot you, right in the spleen. Damn, if you weren't in that suit, that shit would hurt even more." Hood giggled darkly as he approached Dickie, watching him struggle to breathe straight. "That's a good look for him." "What? Why?" Dickie choked out, frowning in confusion and betrayal. "Aw, he doesn't understand. Oh, Big Bird, what can I do? You need to learn a lesson." Hood tilted his head and stretched out his hand, pushing Dickie and taking the bullet off his suit. He pressed over the bruise that certainly was beneath it. Goldie growled in pain and tried to move, but Hood aimed his other gun at his head and brought his index finger to his lips. Dickie clenched his teeth, but understood the message, standing still. "He looks better like that. First, don't call me Jason or Jay. I'm not him. I'm Little Wing or Hood, and you will call me like that if you don't want to get shot again." Hood instructed harshly, pressing the same place again and causing Dickie to let out a scream of pain. "Second, don't be a little bitch. The Kevlar protected you, and because of it, you don't have a hole through your spleen and need to have it removed. Unlike someone in our family." Hood scoffed. "What?" Dickie tried to ask, but was stopped by Hood, suddenly moving his hand to his throat, holding it tight. "Interesting. Just like Jason. He doesn't know. What a fucked up family. Third, you don't interrupt me, Big Bird. You do exactly what I tell you, when and how I tell you, unless you want the little bird to explode like those criminals did." Hood threatened with a manic smile, enjoying the look of fear in Dickie's eyes. "Okay." "Yes," Dickie said through clenched teeth. "Who said violence wasn't the way? They were just too much of a pussy to use it. Good boy." Hood released his throat, and Dickie coughed, breathing deeply. Hood grinned, quickly grabbing a sedative and injecting in the junction of Goldie's neck to his shoulder. "It wouldn't be the first time one of us drugged the other." Dickie looked at him in shock and held Hood's wrist, but it didn't take long for him to be unconscious. Hood threw off the sedative and removed the trackers he knew that Bruce put on Dickie. "Not this time, Dad Bats. Not this time." He grabbed a cloth and cleaned Dickie's bloody nose and dirty blood from his face, throwing the cloth close to the trackers. "Let them find it." Hood then carefully moved Dick's body until his head was lying on his shoulder, and he lifted him up, protectively holding him as he carried him like a bride to outside the safe box. Jason watched the memory get blurred again, and then his mind went black, with the selection of memories that quickly disappeared. Jason gasped when he opened his eyes and looked down at his body, desperately passing his hand over his torso. He sighed in relief when he realized that he was back to control his body. Fuck. He rested the back of his head on the surface against his back. He looked at the ceiling with his unfocused eyes. What kind of shit was that? It was like he was Hood in that memory, not just watching, as in the other ones, but acting as him. It felt so intense, so real. Jason breathed quickly, only being able to hear his heart pounding as his ears ringed, his hands shaking. He had to calm down, to think. What was Hood doing to him? Or was he really doing something? For now, he'd only moved his plans faster, with his own methods, which hadn't been exactly what Jason would have used, but it wasn't anything he wouldn't have either. But that didn't change what Hood was. He was obviously dangerous, too unpredictable, and completely out of control. Just that immediately made Jason a threat, a risk to others. He wasn't stupid. He knew Hood wouldn't just leave his body if he asked. No. There was a reason why fucking Ra's al Ghul didn't believe in the myth. Because if he did, he wouldn't have used the pit like a damn hot tub and risked releasing what should have stayed there. That was why, if Jason were a sane, righteous man, he would take the lesser of the bad options. At that moment, he would immediately release his brothers and lock himself in the bunker forever, to repeatedly die of hunger, until there were no more souls to take his place. He supposed it worked. It would take some hundreds of thousands of painful years. He wouldn't even know if he would die in the end. But it was what he should do. It was the right thing to do. It was what B would have done. Unfortunately or not, he realized he was too selfish for it. Jason didn't want to end like that. He was no stranger to pain and suffering. He could take it. But he didn't have what he wanted since he died in that fucking warehouse. He had lost Robin, his family, his friends, himself. He had become a waste again. Now it was different. He was just getting started, and for the first time in a long time, he was sure of what he was doing. It felt good for that first time. He was taking care of his family. He was the one who was looking out for Timmy, keeping him safe, while the others couldn't even protect him. Jason had a purpose besides blood and vengeance, one that could be corroding him, but it didn't make him feel like he was losing what was left of himself. This was still his plan, even with some adaptations. And what mattered was that Hood was even more interested in accomplishing it than him. Shit. Because of him, Jason found out about Tim's spleen. Or lack of it. How did none of them know it? It was a fucking spleen! They should have realized their little brother lost it. That was just one more proof of how problematic they were. Timmers was even more vulnerable and fragile than he thought he was, and with his bad health and poor self-care, they could easily have lost him to sickness. Not even to a villain, but to fucking sickness. Hood had already done more for Timbo than most of his family did in the last few months. Which made Jason think. Hood didn't appear until now. Not when Jason was back, when he started his revenge, when he almost killed Joker and failed. His line of thought was contradictory. He knew. After all, it had been the green that blinded him and made him want to hurt his little brother badly. But like him, Hood didn't seem to want to do that anymore. It actually only wanted revenge itself when Timbits was in danger. That detail couldn't be ignored by him. Hood had watched an entity of hundreds of years old, full of mad and murdered consciousnesses, act soft, close to the little bird. Even to Dickie, who Hood seemed to be pretty mad at, just like him. He'd even cared when he was unconscious. Of course, that wasn't really the case with Bee and Damien, but Hood calculated exactly what would take them down without killing them. That was already more than he could ask. So, it had to mean something. If Hood was as obsessed in protecting and taking care of his little brother and their family as he was, Jason could deal with the pit using his body as a vessel to go on with his plan. That was enough for him. Because in the end, this wasn't about him. It was all about Tim. And who was Jason to deny what he could have with Hood by their side? He couldn't. Breathing deeply, Jason got up. He could hear the low sobs coming from Timmy's room, reminding him of the last memory he had seen. Shit. Hood had been such a great asshole. He would have to make up for everything he had said. Actually, maybe not everything. Hood had been smart, too. There were many things Jason could use to bring Timmy to their side. But Connor hadn't been one of them. That just changed. He looked at his hands, thinking about what he was capable of now. He could bring his little brother's best friend, boyfriend, or whatever, back. Jason didn't know how he felt about being able to bring people back from the dead, but he couldn't say he hated the advantages of it. Hood was right. Timmers was vulnerable to his care, and was hungry for touch, to be loved, so after he experienced what exactly it meant to have family by your side, he wouldn't take long to accept the offer. And that served for the rest of his birds, too. Things just got much easier. If, after Jason took them, he found out he was the one with the key for them to have everything they wanted, then they would accept their fate much easier. They all had lost people they loved. They were all broken, including Bee. Jason scoffed. It seemed like Daddy was about to gain a new hole in his plans. That just reminded him. He had a little bird to feed and take care of. And now he had to be even more careful with him, to make sure he wouldn't lose his little brother to any stupid shit like the flu. But he would need help for it. He was new with the whole thing of being a good big brother, and there were 2 people he knew could help him with that. Elfie was out of his limit at the moment, which meant the second option was the only one left. Dickie would have to serve. It didn't matter that he had been irresponsible and an idiot in the last months. Jason had to admit that Goldie still knew how to be a good big brother when he wanted. He would just need a little incentive and a firm hand to make him accept his place in the family. And Hood could have exaggerated with the shot, but Jason knew the right balance for him. It was time for a family reunion. Heading towards Dickie's room, Jason couldn't wait for what the next few hours awaited him. Chapter 21. Dick. He didn't know what to do. When Dick left the cave with Bruce and Damien, he thought they would finally come back with Jason and Tim before Steph, Cass, and Duke even arrived. That this nightmare would be over without any more deaths, and they would be able to fix their relationships and help Jason. Like a family. He had been hopeful. Probably too naive. And now he was chained to a bed, inside an unknown place, half naked, and with none of his weapons or gadgets. Dick ignored the pain of the bruise on his abdomen, and struggled against the handcuffs on his hands and ankles again. But after doing it so many times, he knew it was pointless. He rested the back of his head on the pillow, breathing heavily and looking at the ceiling. How could he have let it get to this point? There were so many things Dick regretted in his life. All the times he failed as a hero, as a son, as a friend, and as a sibling. They could have never happened if he was just better like he should be. He tried to reach the closest to perfection. He had been trying since he became an orphan, then the son of Bruce Wayne, the Batman. But it never seemed to matter. Every time he thought he was doing the right thing, being better, choosing the right path, someone got hurt because of it. Why could he never be enough? Corey, Wally, Babs, Damien, Bruce? Dick was raised to recognize a pattern, and it was clear that there was one. He sighed and closed his eyes. He wouldn't cry. Not again. He didn't deserve it. He had already done before, in front of someone he shouldn't have been vulnerable with. No, he had to focus. First, he heard a shot, and still didn't have an explanation for it. Second, something calling himself Hood was possessing Jason. He was scary, creepy. He hurt him in a way that few people did, and Dick probably would have nightmares with him. He also was most likely influencing Jason to do all of this, and he had to convince him to let him help him. Third, Tim was stuck there with him, in danger, and his priority had to be to make sure nothing bad happened to him. Never again. Fourth, he had no idea what Hood had done to Bee and Damie, and as soon as possible, he had to find out. After what he experienced with him, anything could have happened to them. And fifth, somehow, Dick had missed the fact that someone from their family, probably Tim, didn't have a spleen anymore. Someone he cared about so much was in danger, even with the simplest sickness, and he didn't know. What a great brother he was. He used to proudly accept the title of a mom friend, always watching over his team and family and taking care of them. But now, he was just as bad as Bruce. Fuck, Wally would be so disappointed in him if he was still alive. Dick had to fix things. He didn't know how he would do it, not in his current situation, but he had to. Because if he didn't, no one would. The sound of steps approaching immediately made Dick open his eyes, looking at the door and getting prepared for whoever would enter. The possibility of it being Hood gave Dick goosebumps in a way none of the villains he ever faced did. And he had Slade, a guy who literally wanted to make him his child soldier since he was a kid, as one of his villains. But if it was Jason, then he had a chance. Hood had pretended before, but Dick knew how to identify him, and he had said this time Jason would remember everything, which could be a lie again. Of course it could, but this was also Dick's chance of changing his mind. The door was opened, and Jason, or at least Dick believed it was him, entered the bedroom and glared at him. He decided to take a risk, even with the memory of Hood threatening Tim if he mistook him for Jason, and all he did to him in that apartment. "Jay?" Dick questioned with hope. "Oh, you realized it was me. I thought you'd fall for it again." Jason scoffed and walked towards him. At the same time, Dick was relieved that he got it right. He felt the weight of not realizing that Jason was Hood, not only once, but 3 times, being ashamed of it. How did he allow himself to not see it in any of them? He couldn't recognize his own brother. "I'm sorry, Jay. I really am, but Hood..." Dick started, desperately, but was interrupted by Jason. Yeah, I fucking know." Jason sighed, exasperated, standing next to the bed. "Now listen to me, okay? I'll release you, and you won't attack me, or try anything. If you do, I would like to inform you that I'm not exactly human anymore, Dickie." Dick frowned. If Jason knew about Hood, why wasn't he panicking like before? He must have remembered everything. Did Jason agree with everything Hood did to him? Or was he just being influenced by him? Dick preferred to believe it was the second one. "Tell me already if you get it or not, before I change my mind about taking you with me," Jason said impatiently and crossed his arms. Okay, he would have to think about the answers to these questions later. What mattered was Jason, the real one, was talking to him, and would release him for now. This was his opportunity to know more about what was happening with his brother and figure out how to take him and Tim out of this. "I get it," Dick agreed, watching Jason unlock the handcuffs on his wrists and ankles. When he leaned, Dick could see that there was no more blood on the side of his hair. Jason probably had cleaned it, but that didn't change the fact that he didn't know the source of it yet. That would have to wait, though. He closed his hands into fists, slowly sitting up, glancing to see Jason watching his movements carefully. He was tempted to attack now, take the first opportunity he had. But he remembered what Hood did when the building exploded. Thinking back at it, it should have been impossible for him to get to the safe box, unless he had to take everything out of his way to it. And having worked with so many superheroes, Dick knew what kind of strength was needed to do it. That was probably what Jason meant, with him not being human anymore. It would explain what happened after he woke up on the bed, how fast and powerful Hood was. Dick's struggle against him would be pointless without his gadgets and a good strategy, like it had been even with him drugged. He needed to figure out what Hood was, and how exactly he was affecting Jason's body and mind, before creating his plan. Opening his hands, and getting up, Dick made a face when the movement made his bruise hurt and his hand hovered over it. It was an ugly and painful bruise, but it would be better if he could cover it. He didn't like to feel so vulnerable. Can you lend me a shirt, Little Wing?" Dick asked, hopeful, facing Jason. "Nah, I like to have the bruise on my sight to remember why it's there." Jason smirked and patted his forearm, then held it as he walked with him towards the door. His words hurt more than the bruise, more than what Hood had done, but Dick didn't discuss it, and only let his brother take him to where he wanted to. After all, what was the point? Hood had already made it clear why he had shot him, even if not why he had done all of that to harm him before. But he knew now. He kind of deserved all of it. Jason opened the door and led Dick to the other side, immediately causing him to analyze the corridor. He had seen it when Hood brought him there, but he was too dizzy to really pay attention to anything. There were 2 other doors, with his bedroom in the middle of them, and one in front of them. Dick had heard Tim's scream coming from his left, which meant that the last door was probably where Jason was keeping him. Dick looked at it, his body tensing when he stopped accompanying Jason. His little brother was right there. He could enter the bedroom and hug him, tell him he was sorry for everything and beg him for his forgiveness. He was close. So fucking close. "Jay," Dick said pleadingly, looking between him and the door. "No, Dickie," Jason snarled, his grip getting tighter and uncomfortable. But it didn't stop Dick. "Only a few minutes. Hood told me someone lost a spleen, and I know it's him. And it's dangerous, Jay. Just let me check on him," Dick asked desperately, putting his hand on Jason's chest and begging. "Please." "How? You want to check on him like you didn't for 3 months?" Jason retorted, pushing his hand off his chest. "I fucking know it's dangerous, and that's something you probably would have known if you were there for him." Dick shrank. Jason was right. He knew it, but at least he was trying. He wanted to fix things, to tell and show Tim that he cared for him. No, he needed to, because he couldn't let another person in their family think he wasn't cared for. His own self-worth and self-esteem issues were enough. "I know, but I want to help him just like you," Dick whispered. "Then keep walking, idiot," Jason snapped, releasing his forearm abruptly and stepping aside. Dick clenched his teeth, walking by Jason and glancing at Tim's door. A part of him wanted to try and fight him, make an attempt to get to his little brother. It was nothing less than what he should do after messing up with him, but Dick had to remember that leaving the room was progress. If he fucked up, Jason would take him back and not let him out, and then his chances of seeing Tim would be ruined. Jason had lied and acted, But he said that if he behaved, Tim would be brought to him later. Maybe Jason was testing it, though. It could be. Anyways, he couldn't risk it. Dick headed out into the corridor, stopping when they arrived at the main area. It was a bunker then. The lack of windows in his bedroom already gave him a hint to it, but now seeing the rest of the place, it was obvious. But how did Jason have a bunker like this without Bruce knowing? All of them had their own hiding places in Gotham, but it was nothing like this, and they knew B had at least an idea of where they were. "Stop looking and start cooking. Timbo is hungry," Jason ordered impatiently. "Wait, what? Cooking? Haven't you fed Tim, Jason?" Dick faced Jason with a scowl, not caring about how he wasn't in the position to be acting like this. "The hell I'm not. Don't come with your judgmental bullshit, Goldie. You don't have the right to talk about feeding our little brother when I found him looking like he hadn't eaten for weeks." Jason growled. Weeks? He knew Tim wasn't good at taking care of himself. He was actually too similar to Bruce, which was scary and not healthy. But he was, at least, functional back when he lived in the manor. So that was why Tim had been captured by the villains, and then Jason, not taking care of himself and missing a spleen, was asking to develop anemia, or something even worse. And it would make sense if he was weaker. Dick wanted to be mad at him for being so irresponsible with himself. But in the end, it was actually his fault. He should have been there for him. Like, in a way, Jason was. He really didn't have the right to judge his brother when he did what he hadn't, all the deaths aside. "I'm sorry," Dick apologized sincerely, even though it wouldn't make up for anything. "Yeah, you already said that." Jason rolled his eyes and pushed him towards the kitchen. "Now, if you are wishing to be useful, cook lunch for the three of us. Something that Timmy likes." Dick walked behind the island in the center, internally smiling. That was why Jason took him out of his room? To cook for them? It probably meant nothing, but Dick was happy that Jason trusted him with that, after everything. Maybe he didn't hate him as much as he thought, and he would have a chance of convincing him. Dick started grabbing what he would need to cook lunch, watching Jason stand on the other side of the island. Was it that bad? Dick asked hesitantly with a frown of concern, glancing at Jason as he picked up the ingredients. He wasn't starving, but he was too fucking close. The little shit was surviving on coffee and his stubborn behavior. Jason scoffed, but his tone was also caring. Even with all that mess and the high possibility that Jason was being a puppet to Hood, it was good to see his brother caring for Tim. He just wished it was in a different kind of situation. "And you decided to help him?" Dick pointed out. "Yeah, I did. Because as much as I refuse to admit, I care about him. Got a fucking problem?" Jason questioned defensively. Dick raised his eyebrow. Jason's body language was tense and aggressive, indicating it wasn't the best moment to try anything. "No," Dick answered firmly, but averted his eyes from Jason, focusing on cooking. "Good." Jason grunted and leaned over the island, his arms crossed, as he observed him. They stayed in an awkward silence that was only broken when Jason instructed Dick of where everything he needed was. On another day, Dick would be happy to just have Jason with him as he cooked, just enjoying each other's presence. But he had to remind himself of the situation. This wasn't a nice family moment as much as he wished it was. No, this was a bomb waiting to explode in his face. Jason hated him for now, and he couldn't get to Tim. But he also couldn't just do nothing, and it was obvious that as soon as he finished, he would be back in the bedroom. As the minutes passed and a complete meal started to be formed, Dick decided that before he was dragged back, he had to make a last attempt to get to Jason. His theory that Hood was influencing Jason could be easily wrong, mainly from what he had seen. But if he didn't try, Dick would never forgive himself. When he put beef, a bit of salad, rice, and mashed potatoes on each of 3 plates, Dick decided to act. "Why are you doing this?" Dick questioned, trying to not show how nervous he was, as he put the plates on the island and looked at Jason. "What? This shit again, Dickie?" Jason sneered. "I just want to know why. Can't you at least give me that?" Dick asked tiredly, holding the edge of the island tightly. Jason stared at him, sighing. I'm doing it for Timbo. Okay? For us. Jason confessed angrily, opening his arms. Because differently from some people, I'm tired of seeing my family hurt, and I'm actually willing to do something about it. Wait, was that it? Dick didn't even pay attention to what Jason insinuated about him and Bruce, too absorbed in the first part. Jason just wanted to keep them safe? Then why? Why did he do all of this? You kidnapped Tim, Jay. You threatened to hurt and kill him. And you hate me. You shot and kidnapped me. Dick frowned, ignoring how saying it out loud hurt, and shaking his head. That isn't protecting us. To Dick's shock, Jason laughed darkly, as if he had said something stupid. I was bluffing, Goldie. I wouldn't do any of that to Timmers, and as much as I'm angry at you, I don't hate you. Yeah, I kidnapped you both, but you're safer here than out there. Jason explained simply, pointing to the bruise on his abdomen and shrugging. Now, that was a miscommunication, but I think you get that you deserve it. I was just making sure you knew that. I don't hate you. Dick took time to process what Jason said. Bluffing. He couldn't believe it until he saw Tim, but he felt stupid. Of course it was bluffing. Of course Jason's anger would look like hatred, and he would see what he was doing as protecting them. He wasn't joking when he told them there was no other way. Jason found Tim, freezing and under the influence of fear toxin, thinking his own family wanted to kill him. If it had been Dick, he knew he wouldn't be the same after it, even if nothing he did was close to what Jason did. So, for his brother, this was his way of stopping it from happening again. Of showing Dick and Bruce how they fucked up, just like he did when he was back from the dead. Dick still didn't know how Hood fit into that, but he probably wasn't making it better. Jay. Dick started conciliatorially, walking around the island and stopping in front of Jason. It's okay to want your family safe, to want to take care of Tim. That's what love is. But there are other ways of doing it. Really, Dickie? How? Should I do like you and pretend I care, just so I don't feel bad about myself, while abandoning the people I care about? Jason retorted, his voice dripping spite. It hurt. Dick could say that Jason was wrong, but he didn't know anymore if he was. He cared. He did. And nothing and no one would change that fact. But did he show it right? Or was he just being the worst of Bruce? Because he had to be for Tim to believe he wanted him dead, and for Jason to be so mad that he thought he hated him. No, Jason, I didn't pretend. I care about each of you. And I'm sorry I failed with you and Tim. I'm sorry. But my love for you is real. Dick argued, trying to make Jason understand. He would die for them. He would do anything for his family. How is it real? You didn't love me before I died, Dickie. You couldn't fucking stand me. And the first times you showed any kind of sign you wanted to be my older brother, you went back to your little friends and pretended I didn't exist. Dick snarled. And although his tone was full of anger, Dick could see the pain in his eyes. Do you really expect me to believe that you wanted to love me when I came back and beat the shit out of you? It wasn't like that. Not entirely. That's not true, Little Wing. I love you, I just didn't... Dick was interrupted when Jason suddenly pressed him against the refrigerator, his hand on the back of his head, protecting it from the impact, but not his back. That hit hard. He breathed deeply, making a face of pain when his bruise throbbed. When Hood threw him on the wall, like that, he hadn't been so kind. You what? You couldn't look at what Daddy substituted you for? You couldn't deal with the fact that Bruce threw you away like trash when you went against him? Jason sneered, cruelly continuing. Is that why, perfect boy? It was like Jason stabbed his heart. Because yes, it was because of all of that back then. It hadn't been Jason's fault. He was just an innocent kid that needed Bruce's help and got himself in the middle of their fight. Dick loved Jason from the start. How couldn't he? He was complete little brother material. A little shit with a big heart and a bad attitude. But he was too self-absorbed into his own emotions, and how it hurt to see the way Bruce acted with him. As if he wasn't his son anymore. Or, at least, not good enough to be. And when Dick realized how much he cared about Jason, it was too late. Jason deserved a loving father, a caring brother, and the only good thing they had given him was Alfred. I reminded you of the fact that you weren't enough, didn't I? That Bruce didn't stop with you, and wouldn't stop. That we're nothing but the collection of a madman with a savior complex. Jason snarled bitterly. Dick's lungs failed him. He couldn't breathe, couldn't refute Jason's accusations, even though he knew they had to be wrong. In his darker moments, Dick had considered that possibility too. That in the end, him and his siblings were just a way of Bruce dealing with his own shit, and nothing they did would ever change that. No, they were wrong. As Jason continued, it became harder and harder to believe that. And you can't accept it, can you? You need to believe that somehow, after everything he has done, he cares. Because if you don't, there's nothing left for you. Jason spat, licking his lips. All the years of being the golden boy, doing everything you could to make Daddy happy, they will have been pointless. They all have proved what you already knew, that it doesn't matter what you do. The little Richard Grayson will never be enough for him to love you. Jay, Dick exhaled, with unshed tears in his eyes, trying to figure out what he should say, even when there was nothing to say. Bruce, he was complicated. A part of Dick knew he loved them, in his own way, that it was just hard for him to not be an asshole and show it. But another part of him was just full of everything Jason had said, of all of his insecurity, like it had been for years and years. And, as a coward, he couldn't fight that side of himself, like he never could. All Dick could do at that moment was to say what he repeated to himself until he forgot about all the doubts. He loves us. Dick put his hands on Jason's face and held his cheeks. Bruce just doesn't know how to show it. That's why he needs us to do it. He was speaking, but deep down, Dick felt like he was trying to convince himself more than he was trying to persuade Jason. For how long, Goldie? How long will you keep defending his actions? You're just lying to yourself. He should be better for us. We should be his priority, always. Jason questioned harshly, clenching his teeth. That's what fathers should do, right? I would have died again and killed for him. For Tim. For each one of you. Why can't he do the same? Why do you have to keep excusing him, as we fall apart because of him? The words came in a rush, and the waves of hurt dripping from the lips of one of the people Dick loved most in the world. And he just stood there and took it, because he realized he didn't have any answers for that. What would he say? That they were Bruce's priority? No, it would be a big fat lie. Dick had learned soon that they weren't, that he could love, fight, and sacrifice himself for them, but they would never be. And it was okay. It really was. It would be too much to ask for. Batman was part of who Bruce was. It was his priority, and it would always be. Once, he had been like Jason. He couldn't understand. But now he accepted that, even if it was impossible for it to ever stop hurting. That was why he had to be different. Bruce didn't give them what he wanted to. Dick knew that. But he could do it for him. He could be enough. It's okay, Jay, I get it. I get why you're mad. Why you're doing all of this. You're right. But if you stop, if you trust me again, I swear we can make it right this time. I will do what he can't. I will make up for everything. Dick knew his features were contorted in angst, showing how desperate he was. But he hoped that this time, Jason would listen to him. Just give me another chance. At least one. For a moment, a single moment when the anger and pain on Jason's face slowly disappeared, Dick thought he had made it. But his heart was broken right after, when Jason scoffed, a strange mix of scorn, pity, and care. You're so naive, Dickie. Look at yourself. You let Damien become what he is now, to almost kill Timmy. You're not in a position to be our big brother anymore. His words shouldn't have affected Dick as much as they did. With wide eyes, he felt like a hand was holding and smashing his heart. He couldn't decide that. Not even Bruce could. Dick would be their older brother, even if one day he expelled him from the family. If they forgot about him. It didn't matter what Jason was feeling right now. He had no right to say that to him. Or at least, that was what a small side of Dick was shouting inside of him, incentivizing him to let it clear to Jason. That's not how it works, Little Wing. I'm your big brother, now and forever. You can't take it from me. Dick snarled, and it sounded more broken than confident. He questioned if, in a way, that was what Tim felt like when he took Robin from him. I can't. Jason tilted his head, pulling Dick's hair and his head backwards, causing him to clench his teeth, to not scream. He held Jason's shoulders tightly, trying to push him away, but he didn't move. Just because I was bluffing about Tim, it doesn't mean I was about you. Unless you start showing me that you can be a good big brother, I'll make sure you never see any of your younger siblings again, Dickie. Jason threatened, nothing in his tone or expression telling Dick he was lying. He swallowed, looking at Jason out of the corner of his eye. His heart was racing, adrenaline running through his veins. Dick should be afraid. He was really out of control. His conception of love and protection was distorted. Some would say that he belonged to Arkham now, but which of them didn't? Am I really that bad to you, Jay? Dick questioned, a lonely tear rolling down his right cheek, even if his expression was almost apathetic. If you were. Jason wiped the tear off his face, caringly, and whispered, You wouldn't be here, Dickie, before patting the side of his neck and finally releasing his hair. Dick slowly fell on his butt, breathing deeply, a knot in his throat. He watched Jason grab 2 trays and put the plates, 2 forks, and knives on them. Eat, and don't mess around if you want to see Tim today. Jason ordered distractedly, but he looked at him when he didn't answer, sighing and crouching in front of him. You can change your superhero name, move to another city, become part of a new team. It doesn't matter, Dickie. You're still under his shadow, after all this time. Jason said melancholically, almost sympathetically. And, if you keep going like that, you will end up like him. Alone. And honestly, I don't want to lose you too. Jason got up, taking the trays with him and leaving Dick alone with his thoughts. Jason didn't want to lose him, but he still was. Under his shadow, after all this time. That was the key, wasn't it? How was it possible to love someone so much and feel so much pain because of them? Bruce was a good person. He invested his money in all kinds of charities and social programs to help people, even if he didn't have to. He was also the man that adopted Dick, gave him a home, a family. It was more than Dick ever thought he would have after his parents died. He was Batman, too, a hero that saved countless lives, that was part of the Justice League and protected the world from threats of all kinds. In short, he was the definition of a good person. Because bad people didn't do any of that, and Dick met many of them. But that didn't mean he didn't have issues. Serious, emotional issues. They were part of who he was, and it didn't matter how many times Dick tried to change that. How many times Alfred and Selina tried to help him. It had been useless. Bruce wasn't as bad as he was before. But mostly, he was still the same man Dick admired and loved, but was terrified of becoming like. He failed at that too, didn't he? All the signs were there. If he was different from Bruce, he would have noticed how Damien was feeling. He would have seen what was happening with Tim before it caused all of this. But he didn't. Dick giggled bitterly and closed his eyes, feeling his hands shaking as he embraced himself, breathing quickly. He wanted to be like Jason, to be able to hate Bruce for all the times he hurt them, to be able to just put the blame on him. He truly wanted, but it was just easier to do it all to himself. After all, Bruce loved them. He loved them. Didn't he? Didn't he? That's how we're ending it. Voice crack and all. Notes. Hey guys, this chapter is entirely focused on Dick, because it's needed for the development of the plot. So I would love to know what you did think of his point of view, and his character until now. I'm also having some serious personal problems, so I'm a bit insecure over this fic, and honestly thinking about if I should continue it or not, even though I want to. So it would be good if you told me your opinions about it too. If you enjoyed this story, you can go down to the description below and follow the link to the author's original work. There you can read ahead, leave comments, and leave kudos. If you enjoyed my reading, you can subscribe, or go down to the comments and tell me what else I should read. Please take into account that my backlog goes on for truly ages, and if another podficker has already done a work, I would prefer to not do it unless we're doing it in a group aspect. Thank you for listening. Hey, does the pit have Roz's creepy obsession with Tim? Is that what this is? Am I about to read the worst version of fucking J. Tim possible? Is that what I'm about to read? I feel like this is not the word they wanted. I think, if anything, they were like, okay, it means waste when making steel, but also it means slut, technically. Hood. Baby girl, sweetheart, please. For my own mental health, you can't be thinking this shit about Tim. Jason, grow self-awareness, please. I love that Hood apparently uses he/it pronouns. I don't know if that's intentional, but I think it's very funny. You know, if nothing else, I'm becoming desensitized to the word daddy.